Rachel Wilkins. I'm the state entomologist with the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and today I'll be talking about the emerald ash borer, its biology, and how to identify it in the field. So before I begin, I do want to go over a couple of terms that I'll be using during this presentation. Those are the terms native versus invasive. And so a native species is one that is original and has adapted to its environment over many, many years. It's co-evolved with other native species, and they all kind of work together to create a balanced ecosystem. The next term is non-native, and that's the opposite of native. So it's a species that has originated from an area other than where it's currently found. And another word for this is introduced. And then finally, we have the term invasive. So an invasive is a non-native species, but it's one that causes economic, environmental, and or human harm. Invasives are typically described as being very aggressive in terms of how they spread and how they feed on their hosts. This is due to the fact that they typically don't have any natural predators in this new environment. And overall, they're just described as being very damaging to an ecosystem. So today I'll be talking about the emerald ash borer, and it is described as an invasive species. So the emerald ash borer, as the name implies, feeds on ash trees. So I want to quickly go over tree anatomy, the different layers of a tree, because the beetle will affect certain parts of the tree. So when you're looking at a tree, you see the outer bark, that's that first protective layer. Beneath the bark is the phloem. Another word for that is inner bark. And the function of this layer is to allow nutrients to pass throughout the tree. Below the phloem is the cambium layer. This is the growing part of the tree, so it produces new bark and new wood for the phloem and xylem layers. And then beneath that is the sapwood, also called the living xylem. This layer actually eventually becomes heartwood, but its function is to transport water and minerals throughout the plant up to the leaves. And then finally, in the center of the tree, we have the heartwood. So the heartwood is dead xylem tissue, but it has a very important function. It is the structural component of the tree. And although it's dead tissue, it will not decay or lose its strength as long as all the other layers are still intact and not damaged. And so I highlighted 3 of the layers here, the phloem, cambium, and sapwood, because those are the layers that the emerald ash borer negatively impacts. So if you think you have emerald ash borer on your property and you want to come up with a management plan for any kind of pest, the first thing you want to do is identify your pest. You want to have a correct ID so you know how to manage it best. So I'm going to quickly go through how emerald ash borer is classified. So the beetle is in the order Coleoptera that comprises all species of beetles. It's a very large order. Think of ground beetles, lady beetles, stag beetles, click beetles. It's a very long list. And then within the order Coleoptera, we have the family Buprestidae. So emerald ash borer is a buprestid. Another common name for this family are jewel beetles or metallic wood borers. And you can see how they get that name because looking at the photo, a lot of these species have very vibrant, bright colors. And then within that family, emerald ash borer is in the genus Agrillus. And once you get down to the genus level, you can tell that a lot of the species start to look very similar to one another. So looking at emerald ash borer in the middle of that photo there, you can see that a lot of the species surrounding it look very similar. So EAB can easily get confused with other Agrillus species. And then finally, we're down to the species level. So Planopenis, that specifically describes emerald ash borer, or EAB, as I will be referring to it throughout this presentation. So going into emerald ash borer and its biology, you kind of also want to know what life stages you'll see throughout the year and what types of, should you look for the adults or the eggs or the larvae. So emerald ash borer, they go through what we call complete metamorphosis, just like other beetles as well as butterflies, flies. So this just means that each life stage is drastically different from the other life stages. So In complete metamorphosis, we have the egg, larva, pupa, and adult stages. So for emerald ash borer, the adults can be found from May through August. They'll emerge from the ash tree, and then they'll live for about 3 weeks. And during that time, they will feed on the ash leaves, they will mate, and then the females will begin to lay eggs. So a single individual female can lay about 60 to 90 eggs. And then next, the next life stage is the egg stage. So the females will lay the eggs. You can typically find them throughout the summer. Although they're very, very small, you probably won't typically see the egg stage. They're amber in color, so they kind of blend in really well with the bark of the tree. But the females will lay these eggs on the outer bark, kind of in crevices, so they're protected. And then the larvae will hatch from these eggs in about 7 to 10 days. So the larvae can be found about from June all the way into the fall. Once they hatch, they bore directly into the ash tree. It's important to know that this is the life stage that is the most damaging for the ash tree. They will bore into the ash and immediately begin feeding on those important functional layers of the tree. And then towards the into fall, going all the way through winter into the following spring, the larvae will actually overwinter in a prepupal form. They actually fold themselves in half in a sort of J-shaped formation within the sapwood layer of the tree. So they'll remain like that through the winter. And then starting in the spring, early summer, they will pupate. And then around May, they will start to emerge again as adults, and the life cycle will repeat itself. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the different life stages today, the adults and the larvae. Those are the ones you are most likely to come across in the field. So for the adults, when you're looking at them, they are a lot greener than most of our native species. If you spread their wings apart and their elytra and look at their abdomen, they have a very bright red-pink coloration, and that is a key identifier for emerald ash borer. The adults are about half an inch long, so a decent size. And it's important to note that both their size and their color can vary among individuals. And so you can see that in the photo at the top right. Those are all emerald ash borer, but they do have a lot of variability to them. And then moving on to the larval stage. So the EAB larvae are white, cream colored, very typical colors of other borers as well. So the larvae will grow to be about 1.5 inches long, so they're pretty large. And it's very important to note, keep this in mind, that EAB larvae have bell-shaped body segments, and that's the key identifier when you're trying to, if you find these larvae in the field, look for bell-shaped body segments. So in the photos on the right, you can really see each body segment here. It's kind of flared at the end, very similar to a bell shape. Also, EAB larvae, like other Agrilla species, have these structures called urogomphi at the very last segment of their body. They're just pincher-like appendages, and this is just another way to identify Agrilla species in the field. So emerald ash borer, it's in the name. They feed on ash trees. That is their primary host. And ash trees are so important for our landscape. They provide food and shelter for birds and insects and a lot of our native species. They also help shade our waterways, keep our water cool, and help stabilize banks and reduce erosion. Unfortunately, a lot of our native ash species in North America are susceptible to emerald ash borer. EAB will attack both healthy and unhealthy ash trees. And since EAB has established here, it's estimated that hundreds of millions of ash trees have already been lost. So it's not all negative though. There are some signs that our native green and white ash might be resistant to the emerald ash borer. There's a small percent of ash trees that are showing resistance. So an example of that, they're seeing that over in Pennsylvania at Penn State University. There is a ash plantation that was started in the 70s, where over 2,000 seedlings of ash were planted for a completely different research project. But then when EAB arrived to the plantation around 2012, when they had about 1,700 trees, they started monitoring, EAB's impact on these trees. And they saw after, a handful of years, by 2019, most of the ash trees were decimated by EAB. However, there were about 13 living trees that were not affected by the beetle. It's a very small percentage, but they think that these ash trees, their genetics might play a role in how they're able to survive the beetle, and also seeing how some of these ash trees had different rates of decline. So they're still doing a lot of research looking at the methods of resistance, but it does provide a little bit of hope that maybe some of our native ash trees can survive the emerald ash borer. So when you go out on your property, if you do have ash trees and you're concerned that you may have emerald ash borer, I want to talk about some of the things that you can look for. So when you first look at your tree, there's a couple of easy symptoms you can look for. One of those is crown dieback. So if you look towards the top of your tree, you might see some thinning of the leaves. You might see an absence of leaves towards the top, and it thins as you go towards the center of the tree. And this is just because as the EAB larvae are feeding on those important functional layers, the tree is not able to properly send up nutrients and water to the very top of the tree. And so that causes what we call crown dieback. Another symptom you can look for is what we call epicormic branching. And so that is when the tree starts producing these new shoots. Sometimes they're at the base of the trunk towards the ground. They can also be found maybe in those upper branches. But this is a stress response that the tree produces. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have emerald ash borer in your tree, but the tree is definitely experiencing some stress, and this could be an important symptom. Another sign you can look for, if you think you have emerald ash borer, if you get closer to your tree and you're able to remove some of the bark, you can look for S-shaped galleries. And so these are very serpentine tunnels, which are caused by the larvae feeding on those important layers of the tree, the phloem, the outer sapwood. They create these very distinct S-shaped galleries. And unfortunately, like I mentioned, the larvae are causing the most damage. So this disrupts the tree's ability to move that water and nutrients throughout the plant. And if the tree is not treated, once you start to see these signs and these symptoms, typically in about 3 to 5 years, the tree will die. So here's a photo of a single EAB gallery. And let's say you want to look for the larva, you want to confirm that you do have emerald ash borer in your tree. So where could you find it within this gallery? So one kind of tip, so if you look towards the bottom of the gallery here, you can see that the tunneling is more narrow, it's more brown. This is actually an older portion of the gallery, but if you move up the gallery, you see the tunnel widens because the larva is growing. You see white frass, which is the waste of the larva. So if you're looking for the insect, you might want to look towards the top here. And you might need to look a little bit deeper in case it's pupating. You might want to check to make sure there's not an exit hole nearby in case the insect has already left the tree. But that's a good tip. Look for tunnels that are wider, have fresh white frass in them, and you might be able to find the larva there. So I want to talk about a few other signs and symptoms. D-shaped exit holes are a very good sign that your tree might have emerald ash borer. So on the left there, you can see a single exit hole. It is a very cleanly shaped D, and they're about an inch or an eighth of an inch long. And then if you look in the center here in this photo, you can see that there is another sign you can look for is woodpecker flecking. And so this is caused by woodpeckers coming to the tree. In the process of trying to get to insects within the tree, they kick off a lot of bark. And so that's a sign that you may have emerald ash borer, but you also have some sort of insect activity within your tree. And then finally on the right, you can see what we call bark splitting in the tree here. Another word for this is vertical bark splits, and this is caused by the tree attempting to heal over some sort of damage behind the bark. So as you're looking at your ash trees and you're trying to find emerald ash borer, there's a really good chance you might come in contact with several of our native species. We have a lot of native insects that also feed on ash trees. And while they do cause damage to the ash, they don't typically inflict mortality in healthy, mature trees. They'll actually usually go for trees that are stressed or diseased and already in the process of dying. So one group of native insects you can look for are longhorn beetles on the left there. This is a different family of beetles, and a couple of examples of species are the red-headed ash borer, seen in the photo, and then the banded ash borer. And then in the middle there we have jewel beetles. So this is the same family as emerald ash borer. And so one example, one species in this family that you might see is the flat-headed apple tree borer. And then finally on the right, we have moths. So there are moths that will feed on ash trees as well. A couple examples are the lilac ash borer and the carpenter worm. And so what do these insects look like as larvae when they're inside the tree feeding? So on the left, the longhorn beetles, their larvae are actually called round-headed borers. You can see that by their rounded shape, they don't really have, their body segments aren't as distinguished as EAB. But as these larvae are feeding in the tree, they create more long and straight galleries as they move through the tree. And then when the adults emerge, they typically will create a round or sometimes an oval exit hole as they leave the tree. For jewel beetles, the larvae are actually called flat-headed borers, and you can see why they get that name. They do look very flattened overall. It's important to note that other species of flat-headed borers, unlike emerald ash borer, have rounded body segments, whereas EAB has those bell-shaped body segments. And typically, when the adults emerge from the trees, they will create oval exit holes. And then finally for the moths, they do look pretty different from EAB larvae. One thing you can look for is with a lot of other butterflies and moth larvae, they will typically have a hardened head capsule, or sometimes it'll be darker in color, but that's one thing you can look for. And then when the moths emerge from the tree as adults, they will typically create round exit holes. Another group of insects that you are likely to come across when you're looking at your ash trees are bark beetles. So we have a species called the eastern ash bark beetle. And these are very, very small. They don't look as similar to emerald ash borer, but it's likely you'll come across them. I know I've seen them in the field. But they will create these very small, just maybe a couple millimeters long exit holes in the tree. And then their galleries are very unique. They kind of have galleries that radiate from a central point. So now that I've talked about, what to look for in the field, some different signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer, just want to go through a couple of examples of things you might see in the field and just kind of decide, is this emerald ash borer? So the first one is a photo of a larva. It's a little tricky to look at. It's not as clean as some of those other photos, but is this emerald ash borer? Well, if you look closely, you can kind of see some of the body segments have kind of a flared edge to them, sort of bell-shaped. And so yes, this actually is an emerald ash borer larva. Also, the larva is folded into a J shape, so this one was found overwintering. And so even when you pull it from the tree, it will typically kind of retain that J-shaped form. So let's say you're looking at your tree, you remove some of the bark, and then you see this nice long gallery here. Is this emerald ash borer? No, it is not. So if we look closely at this gallery, it is very long, very straight. There is some bends to it, but if we look at the photo on the right, this is emerald ash borer. So you can see there are some very distinct S-shaped galleries, very serpentine, and that really indicates that it's probably emerald ash borer. So sometimes these galleries can look very similar to one another, and that's why it's really important to find an actual physical specimen when you're looking for EAB. All right, so let's say you come across some exit holes, as you can see in this photo. You're trying to decide, is this EAB? Is it not? So no, these are actually not emerald ash borer. On the right here, these are the D-shaped exit holes created by EAB. If we look at our photo on the left, these are more oval in shape. And some of them arguably could look D-shaped, but they're really not that clean D shape that we're looking for. So here's another photo. You're looking at your ash tree. You see a bark split, but if you look closely, you can also see that there's a really nice gallery right in the middle of that the tree was not able to heal over. So is this emerald ash borer? Yes, it is. So this is almost a textbook example of a S-shaped gallery. If we look at the top here, this is kind of where the larvae first started feeding, and then as it moved down the tree, it continued to feed. The tunnels are getting wider, um, and that's just a great example of what an S-shaped gallery looks like. Not to mention it's also within a bark split, which is another symptom to look for. And looking at this gallery, it looks like it's an older gallery. There's not any kind of frass packed into it. So you're probably not likely to find an insect here, but it'd be a good idea to continue looking at the tree. All right, we have a photo of a larva. It looks pretty flattened. Is this emerald ash borer? No, it is not. So it looks very similar to EAB, but if you look at the body segments of this larva, they are rounded in shape. And so here on the right, this is emerald ash borer. They're both flat-headed borers, but you can clearly see the difference here. You can see the bell-shaped body segments, and you can see that this insect here does not have those. And then finally, let's say you heard about emerald ash borer getting confirmed in your county or a county nearby. And so, you go outside, you look at your ash trees, and you see one that really does not look like it's in good shape. So you're looking at it, it's got some canopy, some crown dieback here. Is this emerald ash borer? Maybe. It's really hard to tell just from looking at the tree itself. There's a lot of different factors that could cause the tree to have crown dieback. Those include disease, drought, poor soil conditions, damaged roots, a lot of different possibilities. But this is a good kind of motivator, it might be a good idea to kind of continue to investigate this tree, maybe look at it more closely, because it is still showing symptoms that indicate it could be emerald ash borer. And so I want to switch gears and talk about the emerald ash borer's distribution across the country, how it's spread, and why its spread has been so extensive. So emerald ash borer is native to Asia and Eastern Russia. It was first found here in Michigan as well as Canada in 2002. And so looking on the map here, the green is the where emerald ash borer was confirmed. Fast forward 5 years, it's 2007, and so far 7 states have officially confirmed emerald ash borer. Fast forward another 5 years, it's 2012, and right now 18 states already have emerald ash borer. And this was actually the year that Kansas got its first emerald ash borer record. EAB was found in Wyandotte County in Kansas City, Kansas area. Moving along another 5 years, and already 31 states have confirmed emerald ash borer, which is pretty impressive. Another 5 years, it's 2022, and now we have 36 states that have confirmed emerald ash borer already. So one of the newer states, Oregon, detected emerald ash borer, and I know they're having a problem with it because they have their native Oregon ash there that they are trying to protect from this insect. And that brings us to today, where there is officially 37 states that have confirmed emerald ash borer. North Dakota was just added to the list last year. So looking at emerald ash borer's distribution here in Kansas, we confirmed EAB in Pottawatomie County this year, as well as Lynn County. Last year, we confirmed the beetle in Nemaha County and Lyon County, and then the rest of the counties were confirmed prior to 2024. So in total, we have 17 counties here in Kansas that we've confirmed emerald ash borer's presence, and we do continue to monitor for the insect every year. So how has emerald ash borer, spread? How has emerald ash borer covered so much distance in a relatively short amount of time? So naturally, emerald ash borer really only travels once the adults emerge from the tree. They travel about less than a mile each year under optimal conditions. And optimal conditions just meaning that there are ash trees nearby. So when the adults emerge from the tree, if there's an ash tree right next to it, it's going to go to that tree. There's no motivation for it to fly any farther. It will only fly as far as the nearest ash tree, typically. So how is emerald ash borer spreading so far so fast? Well, the primary means that this beetle is getting around is due to human-mediated movement. So this includes movement of untreated ash wood and ash products, infested nursery stock, and a really big one is infested firewood that has emerald ash borer in it. So firewood is a really big one. Not only can it spread emerald ash borer, but it can spread a lot of other invasive species as well. And that's why there's a entire, don't move firewood campaign going on, because moving firewood can really help spread these invasive insects. And so what they've coined, hitchhiking when these insects, are in these products and these products are moved. Basically, hitchhiking allows emerald ash borer to travel potentially hundreds of miles within a single year, rather than naturally just dispersing less than a mile each year. So because of the beetle's extensive spread across the country, both the USDA and here at KDA at the federal and state levels, we no longer regulate emerald ash borer. Just a handful of years ago, the quarantines for EAB were dropped. And so this decision was based on the quarantine's ineffectiveness to slow the spread of emerald ash borer. As you saw previously, the widespread distribution of EAB across the country. Also, there aren't really a lot of good lures or traps that can really effectively detect when emerald ash borer has entered a new area. And then finally, by dropping the quarantine, these agencies are able to redirect their resources and their time to other means of slowing the spread. And so right now, some of our priorities, like I mentioned, we do want to continue to slow the spread. We just do that in a few different ways. So we do continue to monitor and survey for emerald ash borer in unconfirmed counties. We try to stay ahead of the insect spread across the state. Another thing we do is we provide a lot of education and outreach, just informing the public about this insect and encouraging folks to monitor their ash trees, stay alert for any kinds of signs or symptoms that might resemble an EAB infestation. And then finally, we are releasing biological control agents to try to help suppress EAB populations in positive counties. So these agents are what we call parasitoids. So they specifically only parasitize emerald ash borer. And so we are releasing these in hopes that they can get established and help slow the spread, help reduce the overall population of emerald ash borer. And so I just kind of want to wrap up my presentation with some concluding statements. So emerald ash borer is inevitable in any area where ash is present. And as long as its host is there, EAB will persist in that area. So even though emerald ash borer has been in an area for a very long time, and it seems like all the ash has been wiped out, we are seeing examples that there are some ash showing resistance to the beetle in what we're calling lingering ash. So what we imagine in the long term is that low populations of both species will probably be present in an area. So what we try to do is just continue to advocate and encourage people to try to slow the spread of this beetle. We always talk about, don't move firewood, don't help the beetle travel any farther than it needs to. But also if you have ash trees on your property, monitor those trees and report any signs and symptoms of EAB, especially if you're in an unconfirmed county. And so, we encourage the public to do all these things so that we can allow research and our long-term understanding of emerald ash borer just to catch up. Also, we want to give time for those biological control agents to establish. And we also want to, allow research looking into genetic resistance in ash to catch up as well, so that we can continue to have those important native ash species in our landscape. And so I did include some references of some of the information that I talked about today. If you guys want more information, feel free to look into these articles and papers. And then that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, you can reach me at my contact information on the screen. So thank you for listening, and go out there and check your ash trees.